Hello and welcome to the Mind Detox podcast. I'm your host, Sandy Newbigging. I'm a trauma-aware therapeutic coach and meditation teacher known for unifying therapy and spirituality, and I'm the author of 12 books, including New Beginnings, Mind Calm, and Mind Detox. I've also been teaching my insights and techniques via my award-winning academy for almost 2 decades. For this podcast, I usually share extracts from my Calm Clan community webinars. I'm also sometimes joined by guest experts for the occasional chit-chat. All so you can heal the hidden causes of anything problematic going on in your life, and so you can access more peace and enjoy the best life possible. I've been a monk and had to get myself out of a spiritual cult. I have a busy clinic with lots of fascinating clients, stories and takeaways. I'm usually creating a course or writing a new book, and I'm on my own journey of healing and knowing myself. So thank you for joining me for this episode. You never quite know what you're going to get, but I hope you get a lot from listening. And without further ado, let's begin. Hi, Sandy here. Just popping in briefly at the beginning of today's episode to let you know that I'm actually sharing an extract from a 2-hour trauma awareness masterclass that I hosted earlier this year. If you benefit, like, and enjoy what you hear today, then you may want to get the full masterclass. To do that, head over to my website, minddetox.com/masterclasses. Enjoy. So what are the benefits of trauma awareness? Well, let me tell you. There's many. And I'm talking about both being aware of it and then being able to do something about it, then being able to release it and be free from it. So by being free of these traumas, we can reduce self-sabotage and procrastination, perfectionism, which is very, very common and costs us a lot or takes a lot of time or energy or whatever. We can reduce overthinking and our chronic negative emotions, the classic ones like anxiety, anger, depression, guilt, shame, grief, these sorts of chronic negative emotions that thankfully we do not have to live with on a daily basis. We can be free of them. We can touch upon them occasionally if necessary and if required and relevant to what's happening in our life, but chronically we can be free of that. We can also reduce bad habits, burnout, health problems. We can massively reduce relationship issues, money problems, etc., etc. So there's many things that we can be free of and reduce. And on the bright side, we can increase peace without these pesky traumas limiting us and messing with our mindset, self-esteem, ability to live more unlimited. We can increase our productivity and prosperity. I'm going to talk today about why and how we can increase our health, energy, vitality, our mental wellness and self-esteem, self-worth, and this wonderful thing called self-love that we may have heard of but might feel a bit elusive. These pesky traumas can be the cause of the opposite of that, and so naturally we get more self-love. Beautifully leading on from that, we can connect much more deeply with others, and I'm going to explain why today. And wonderfully, we can increase our resilience in the face of inevitable life challenges. The goal of life is not to have a picture perfect, nothing bad or nothing challenging ever happening. It can feel like you want to do that, but that's usually because we're lacking this resilience. When we have the resilience, when we know we can bounce back quickly on our mind and our body, spiritually, on all the levels, when we know we can bounce back quickly, it's great for our confidence, and we're much more willing to be challenged by life and therefore grow and learn and be things we've never been and know things we've never known and do things we've never done. So it's really, really great to have that resilience. And that's really what gets corroded by trauma. We can also increase and deepen our spiritual practices and even access higher levels of consciousness. And that's because trauma keeps us in what I call the trauma zone of consciousness, the states of consciousness that are like shame and fear and chronic disruptive problematic anger. These are low level states of consciousness. And by healing the trauma, we can naturally ascend up to higher levels of consciousness. So whatever your desire is, whatever your motivation is, then there's many benefits. So what is trauma? Let's start with the definition. Trauma is the physiological and psychological. So it's not just psychological. It's really important. It's even first in the list. The physiological, the body, okay? It's the physiological and psychological response to distressing events that overwhelm our autonomic nervous system. And I might refer to that today as the ANS, okay? And it overwhelms the ANS, but often due to feeling helpless or unsafe at that very moment in time. Okay, so that's the definition. Okay, it's something that's distressing, it's overwhelming for our autonomic nervous system at that moment in time, which I'll talk about what that is in a bit. And usually it's overwhelming, usually it's distressing because at that moment we feel either helpless or unsafe. Okay, now I've mentioned this a few times if you follow me on social media or whatever, that the word trauma comes from the Greek word for wound. And, you know, it'd be very rare for anyone to get to their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s and have no physical injuries at any point. And it's also very rare to get to these ages, our age, whatever you are listening to this, without any mental and emotional injury too. And so we need to stop the stigma, stop the shame, stop the embarrassment, and actually treat it like any other wound or injury. Okay, it's really, really fundamental because the shame of having it it can block us either taking steps to heal it, or if we are working on healing it, it can block that as well. Just the shame is kind of in the way, and we're having to claw through that to get to just even to talk about it and to release it. So let's have a more empowered relationship with trauma, used for in the right way. And by that, I mean recognized and released. Traumas can actually be very helpful, lead to a lot of learning, growth, and make us better, actually. Make us better than we would be if the trauma had never happened. Okay, so there's another side to trauma that I'm trying to put out there because I really have seen the word stigmatized so much. So when we're getting clear on trauma, you want to recognize that trauma is the inner injury. It's not necessarily the external event, although they're very much tied. It's the injury or the wound that lasts beyond the event. Okay? So the event might have happened, but why is it still impacting me today? Because there's a wound. There's a wound that needs some love, time, attention, care, compassion, forgiveness, or whatever, for that wound to heal and for us to be better as a result of the event happening. An expert in trauma, Gabor Mate, which some of you may be aware of, if you're interested in this subject, one of his favorite quotes or famous quotes is, "It's not what happens to you, it's what happens inside you as a result of what happens to you." So that's really a beautiful way of putting what trauma is. Now, one of the main reasons trauma has an impact on us, a negative impact on us, is because it chips away and corrodes our inner sense of safety. That's where partly where the resilience comes from, having this inner safety, which is wonderful when you get that back. It's wonderful. It chips away at our inner safety and our ability to trust ourselves, others, and the wider world as well. Okay, so remember that when you're looking to heal trauma, or you're looking to even define if something happened to you was a trauma, one little test would be, did it have any effect on my inner sense of safety or my capacity to trust others? You know, when I was a kid, a teenager, I went into a bar one day on this caravan site that my family used to have a caravan in Scotland, and there was a drunk guy at the bar, and at that age I had a ponytail. Don't get distracted from the story, but I had a ponytail, and this big muscular guy, drunk on the bar when I was just ordering a pack of crisps or something, he grabbed me by the ponytail and pinned me to the bar. I remember looking out, and no one was doing anything, and they were just kind of almost smirking, and no one was coming to help me, and it was a real. I had the adrenaline rush, and it was really scary, and I didn't know what to do. And the more I said I hadn't done anything, the more he was accusing me of lying, and it was getting even worse. And well, long story short, I remember to this day that when I was riding my bike around that caravan site the next day, my safe place, that had been my safe place for so many since I was almost born there. So it was my safe place, but I remembered cycling around the caravan park the next day, not feeling safe, and that unsafety carried on through until I finally released that trauma years later. Okay, years later. So trauma also corrodes creates unhealthy and unhelpful beliefs. We often form beliefs and come to certain conclusions at that moment of trauma that can influence us for decades, and we need to release the trauma in order to release these beliefs. It also creates unhealthy and unhelpful behaviors and mental and emotional responses. We can get more triggered, more reactive, etc. And over time, as the trauma compounds, we end up experiencing life as increasingly stressful, scary, shame-inducing, isolating, and limited. So in that moment where I was in that bar that day with my ponytail pinned to the bar, that isolation I felt in that moment started to bleed out into the rest of my life, and I started experiencing that isolation. Partly because you start operating from the brainstem, the reptilian part of your brain, our nervous system, and it's more black and white. You're with me or you're not, good or bad back here, instead of here at the frontal lobes and stuff. We're much more creative, hopeful, happy, etc., etc. Okay, is this making sense, guys? Is this helpful? Continuing with what trauma is, I want you to recognize the two traits of trauma. Okay, the first trait of trauma is a dysregulation of the ANS that I talked about a minute ago, and I'm going to go into more in the next slide. So we get dysregulated autonomic nervous system, and it can remain dysregulated, and that leads to a whole host of issues, which I'll come on to in a minute. Another trait of trauma is the trauma memory is stored in a part of the brain called procedural memory. Okay, and this is a bit that's often overlooked in trauma awareness and trauma healing. It's stored in a part of the brain called procedural memory. And once the trauma is installed in this part of the brain, we can end up reacting every time we're triggered. So anything slightly similar appears in our life, we will lock into that old trauma, and we'll start feeling the anxiety or whatever it might be. It's because our unconscious mind is always filtering our reality and always asking, where have I seen this before, heard this before, smelt this before? So when you see a pair of trousers or whatever, you know how to put them on. They're in the procedural memory, and you'll probably put the same leg in the trouser first every day. Same with a toothbrush. You'll usually brush your teeth with this in the same way, with the same hand every day. That's got into the procedural memory, okay? And so it's very reactive, very unconscious mind, and that's why we end up getting triggered. And it generalizes out over time, and we get triggered more often, and that's why, in the previous slide, a life ends up being increasingly stressful, scary, shame-inducing, isolating, and limited, okay? Essentially, the trauma impairs our ability to interact with ourselves, others, life in a calm and productive way. Because of the dysregulation and it being stored in the procedural memory. So to heal, let's have a time out and just think about, what are we going to do about this knowledge? Well, to heal, I've recognized in my own work there's really three primary steps to healing. First is to recognize what the trauma is, recognize what's happened to you. And that's why I'm doing this class, because so many of these early life traumas, people have never heard of them before. And a lot of my work one on one is educational, in session, hearing what's going on for someone, and then going, are you aware that exactly what you described there? I'm not putting words in your mouth or labeling you or branding you, but exactly what you've just described happened in your childhood or your relationship with your mum or your dad or your siblings or that event or whatever. That is actually a trauma called X. And the relief when someone goes, oh, I'm not just faulty or broken or not very good at being human. It's actually a thing that has been found to have an impact on us long term. So the first is to recognize it, and that's what we're really doing today. Then we want to release it from the brain and the body. Okay? It's in the procedural memory, but it's also in the autonomic nervous system. Okay? Throughout the body. And once we've recognized it and released it, we then need to rebuild. And this is a really important part of anyone's healing process, because we need to rebuild the internal resources and responses that were absent or corroded by the trauma. And what I mean by that is certain traumas in our early life, it's not just what happened, but it's what didn't happen. Okay? And because of what didn't happen, we didn't get certain beliefs. We didn't learn certain behaviors. We didn't learn how to interact and relate with other people or whatever. And so we just never learned it in the first place because of the trauma. So you don't just release it, you need to rebuild. Okay? And so that might be from scratch, from zero. I've never had any worthiness. I've never known I'm good enough. I've never known I'm lovable. I've never known I'm capable or whatever. I've never known I'm capable or whatever. Okay? Or it might be we need to rebuild what was corroded. So it might have been there already, but it's been corroded by the trauma. So we need to rebuild these internal resources. Is that clear? It's a really simple way of engaging it. It's really important that you recognize, release, and rebuild. And it's the rebuild that many therapists out there miss, and often issues come back. Or people are sent off into the world having released it, but they don't have the internal resources, the beliefs, the behaviors, the responses, etc. They don't have them to really have the life that they're hoping for. You almost create a void. It can even lead to some grief sometimes after therapy if we haven't rebuilt. Okay, so very, very important. So let's get into this ANS that I was talking about and linking it to what's called the bell curve of the autonomic nervous system. And this image here is by Dr. Melanie Salmon, who taught me QEC. This is the FFFFF bell curve. Or I might just call it the bell curve. Okay. Most of the ANS functions occur in the sympathetic and the parasympathetic divisions of the nervous system. Okay. So the sympathetic, you might have heard of, that's where we got fight or flight, etc. And we've got the parasympathetic nervous system. That's where we kind of want to be hanging out most of the time. That's where we're feeling calm, we're connected to ourselves, we're productive, and we're able to interact with the world, we're able to get things done. We're just able to function optimally, okay? And from a physical health perspective, when we're, these two, sympathetic and parasympathetic, work together to create homeostasis in the body, which is a state of balance in the systems needed for the body to survive and function optimally. And so when the ANS is compromised, because, for example, trauma has got us stuck in fight, flight, freeze, flood, fawn, then we can, it's one of the main causes of health problems, okay? So very often, just by getting the ANS re-regulated, resilient, healthy and functioning optimally again, that's like the trunk of the tree and the roots, and all the other systems, all the other branches coming off of that can start to function more optimally as well. So, my first piece of advice for you is if you have any health condition, yes, you can focus and target and trying to get the root cause of it, but more generally, it's really cool just to first of all focus on getting the autonomic nervous system back to balance, back to baseline. So, what you see in this diagram is that we're meant to be hanging out down here in baseline, and depending on what's happening in our environment, we're meant to occasionally go into fight, flight, freeze, flood, fawn, or whatever is required, but then move back down to baseline and hang out here most of the time. So if we start, then the sympathetic nervous system starts to get aroused, we move up from concern, worry, anxiety, fear. This would be the flight or the fright response. The fight would be irritation, frustration, anger, hostility. Okay. Now, if we get up to the realms of panic when it comes to fear or rage, then that's when we're called flooding. Okay. It's a flood of emotion. It's overwhelming at that point. Okay. So if anyone's had a panic attack, you're actually up here in the flood. All right. This is really helpful to know because it's nice. It's helpful to know in these moments when these emotions are there, especially if they're intense, we can recognize what the nervous system is doing and recognize it's actually a survival response. It's not working against you, it's trying to help you that moment in time. But we need to release the trauma so that it doesn't have to have such huge reactions. Unless you need it, unless you're in severe danger and you need the rage to protect yourself. Flood is not a problem. It is if it becomes more chronic. It is if our cuppeth overfloweth, and it doesn't take much to tip us over from fear to panic or anger to rage or whatever. We need to empty the cup, clear out that nervous system, and get back to baseline. And just so you know, if we have a major shock, a major accident, or a very shocking trauma, or we have a chronic trauma over an inescapable unsafety, then we can end up in freeze. So freeze is where we become more numb and disconnected, disassociated. Okay, so if you feel a bit numb, you feel a bit dissociated, depression hangs out up here. Okay, people don't really call it that way, but this is where depression will hang out. This is where anger issues hang out. This is where anxiety, chronic anxiety hangs out. Okay, up here, if we get to overload, overwhelm, it's just too much. Either that's an acute big event or chronic trauma over time, we can get to a point of freeze. And we need to melt ourselves. We need to get back down to here. And what sometimes happens for people is that they get into freeze, the nervous system wants to do its thing, automatic, without any intervention or therapy. It wants to get back down here. But what can happen is as we start coming out of freeze, we can hit the flood. And we go, oh, I don't want to feel this. And we bounce back up into freeze. And some people do this freeze flood for years, for absolute decades. Okay, this is also where addictions hang out as well, or any other self-soothing activities we might engage, where we're distracting ourselves and numbing ourselves out. Too much TV or whatever, doom scrolling on the phone or whatever. This is where that hangs out too. So is that helpful, guys, to really see what's going on and how it works? We want to be hanging out here. We want to pop up to here only when required. And then a healthy nervous system would be expected to return back to complete baseline and optimal balance within a couple hours of any trigger or any genuine reason to engage the sympathetic nervous system, the fight, flight, freeze, flood, fawn response. Now, this final F, we've talked about fight, we talked about flight, we talked about freeze, we talked about flood, but there's another F here, and it's one that's often overlooked with the ANS, and I'm trying to increase ANS awareness right now, and that would be the fawn response. The fawn response. And so I just want to take a moment just to share a bit more about the fawn response, because it's very, 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 very common. And it can answer a lot of things if you have been fawning and you weren't aware of it. So fawning is a survival mechanism to avoid punishment or more trauma, okay? So the fawning is more a response to chronic trauma. think about the child who, from a certain age or all the way through, day after day, month after month, is in an unsafe environment or with a narcissistic parent or constantly being bullied or whatever. I started fawning because of bullying in my childhood that went on for years. Okay, primary school all the way through to graduating secondary school, years and years. So that chronic trauma is more where fawning comes in. And the fawning response happens if we can't or it's not safe to engage fight, flight, or freeze. Okay? So there are some circumstances when actually it might not be safe to numb out and freeze. It might not be safe to fight back. Maybe the person is much bigger and you can't fight back. You can't, it might not be safe to flight, run away. You're only 5 years old. You didn't know where else to go or whatever. Or you're 55, but you feel trapped by finances and house and nowhere else to go or whatever. Whatever is causing, it means we can't or it's not safe to engage fight, flight, freeze. Then we will try to soothe and befriend the perpetrator who is meaning us harm. Okay? And we do that to try to convince the perpetrator's nervous system that we're on their side. So I want you to imagine like you're walking up the street and there's someone there and you can't run and you can't fight and it's not safe to freeze. Think what would probably happen. You'd probably try to befriend them. Hi, mate, it's no problem. It's okay. I'm just going to walk my way. I'm going to be okay. No problem. We do this fawning response to try to avoid punishment, to protect ourselves, to avoid any trauma. And fawning is fascinating because it involves a unique autonomic state which combines all three fight, flight, freeze autonomic nervous system responses at the same time. At the same time. Very confusing for the nervous system and the body because we basically have one foot on the brake and one foot on the gas pedal simultaneous. Okay? One foot on the brake, one foot on the gas pedal simultaneous. And so that's why fawning can be disguised as the other ones. Okay? As the other ones. So I know it's a lot of words on the screen here, but here's the symptoms of fawning, and I'm going to read them out to you. Seeking validation from others to know that you're acceptable or worthy of being liked and loved. So we're often seeking validation. Fawning is very other focused, and we're always putting others first, but to an unhealthy way. Not just nice and being of service and being kind and being flexible, but we're always putting other people's needs before ours. Our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors aim to minimize the stress or danger, to avoid conflict, criticism, and disapproval. Fawning leads to people pleasing, faking okayness. That day when I was pinned to the bar with my ponytail, I had a smile on my face. Isn't that fascinating? I was so scared. I was overwhelmed. But I had a smile on my face, which is probably why no one came to help me, because they thought I was okay. But anyway, it fakes okayness. I have no problem to you. I couldn't fight. I couldn't flight. I fawned. It leads to codependency, submissiveness, anxiety around other people's feelings and needs. What do they need? Don't upset them. Don't be late. Don't make a mess. It can lead to depression due to a disconnection and a suppression of ourself, the numbing out, the freezing. We can end up hiding and suppressing our true thoughts and feelings. And in that, there's an abandonment of our needs and a lack of healthy boundaries. And a large part of the work I'm doing with people one-on-one is releasing the fawn response, but doing a lot of trauma release in order to make it safe to do so. And rebuilding healthy needs and boundaries. And the knock-on effect of that one thing, rebuilding these healthy needs and boundaries, is massive. Massive. And boundaries isn't just between other people, it's boundaries within ourselves. Having boundaries able to not reach for that extra bit of cake or having a boundary where your body is tired and so you do what you need and you give your body rest instead of scrolling or watching something until late in the night and you're tired the next day. Having healthy boundaries with yourself, but also with others. And here's something with fawning that you need to be aware of. It makes us highly vulnerable to attracting narcissistic, abusive people into our life who will exploit our willingness to deny our own needs. and they'll exploit our lack of healthy boundaries. And I've seen it many times where, I was hearing a story recently from someone that was sharing how their brother had had 5 divorces by age 50. He'd also incidentally had a narcissistic mother. And he turned around age 50 on his 5th divorce and went, oh my God, I've been marrying my narcissistic mother over and over and over again. In other words, he had, because of his narcissistic injury as a child, not only did he feel he deserved that sort of woman in his life, narcissistic, abusive woman, but also he attracted them. He literally was attracted to them and attracted them. And it would get to a point where it was so bad he'd have to have another divorce, but he could see the pattern. Oh my God, I've been marrying my narcissistic mother. Why? Because it makes us vulnerable. And that's why we attract that sort of person. That's why, as a fawner, I attracted a narcissistic spiritual teacher. And when I healed my trauma, I rebuilt my needs and boundaries. I was like, what is going on here? Why have I been letting this guy bully me and belittle me and manipulate me and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And it stopped being okay. Okay, it stopped being okay. And he knew he'd lost me and he couldn't manipulate me anymore. And I got out. Okay, so I just wanted to take a moment on this fawn response because I think it's really important for us to recognize that. It's often not talked about. Often we just talk about fight or flight. Often we don't talk about flood or freeze, especially this fawning. And I think a lot of us can relate to it. It's a journey to heal it, but it's worth it. It's really worth it. And I'm glad who said in the chat box, this is hitting home. I'm glad I took the time to spend on that. All right, moving on. Other impacts of this dysregulated autonomic nervous system or healing our autonomic nervous system. And I want to take a moment to talk about body, mind, emotions. Because, some of you, if you've been following me for a while, you'll know I talk about the mind-body connection. But you'll also know that I've more recently been talking about the body-mind connection. Because the mind-body connection works both ways. So a lot of us are trying to improve our mindset so that we heal things in our body. We feel better in our body. We're trying to think positively. We're trying to change our beliefs. We're trying to do all this sort of stuff and all that sort of stuff. But I want you to be conscious and aware today of the body, mind, emotions. Due to the body-mind connection, if we're stuck in this fight, flight, freeze, flood, fawn, we're going to have more chronic negative emotions, irrespective of if we try to think positively, look on the bright side of life or whatever, because the nervous system is screaming in the opposite direction and the body doesn't lie, okay? So if we're in fight, we're gonna be more likely to have frustration, anger, and discontentment, okay? Discontentment is because we're gonna be in judgment and wrongness and we're gonna end up with discontentment. If we're in flight, we're gonna, from a body-mind connection, we're going to end up having more thoughts and emotions around worry, anxiety, fear. If we're in freeze, our thoughts and emotions are going to be more associated with depression, pointlessness, hopelessness. So we can try to think positively, but we need to get it out of our brain and body. Does this make sense? Because the body is also affecting our mind and the sorts of thoughts we're having, and therefore the sorts of emotions we're having. Okay, so when we heal the trauma, when we release it, the body-mind connection then starts helping us having different thoughts. We automatically have different emotions. Okay, how cool is that? We're not going to have to try to feel something different. We're going to switch off the fight, flight, freeze, flood, fawn chronically, fight, flight, freeze, flood, fawn, and we're going to more naturally, consistently have a nicer mind, more positive, hopeful, optimistic thinking, and better feeling. Incidentally, just if you haven't got the memo yet, flood, there'd be more panic and rage. And if we're fawning, well, like I said before, it can be a combination of the above feelings more often. But like I said before as well, it usually is suppressed. Or we'll have it, but we'll be constantly denying and suppressing these feelings, which is really unhealthy. That's one of the reasons it causes stress and dis-ease, I believe, that chronic suppression of our truth. Okay. And inevitably, these emotions, if they're chronic, can negatively impact our health. Now, this next slide is a bonus for you guys. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but you're going to be able to have reference to it afterwards in the downloadable presentation. But I just want to indicate and give you an idea. This is my research I've done on body mind conditions. Okay, so like I said before, if we're in a chronically compromised autonomic nervous system, that is going to have an impact on other physical reactions, responses, symptoms, and conditions in the body. And so I just wanted to provide you a little kind of key here of if we're in fight, we're going to be more likely going to have things like allergies, rashes, digestive disorders, headaches, migraines, insomnia, etc. If we're in flight, we're going to have more likely going to have flight physical conditions, acid reflux, anemia, appendicitis, asthma, autoimmune conditions, candida. The fear for the candida is because I'm feeling invaded, and then the body responds and has a little invasion of candida, etc., etc. If you're in freeze, it's often linked with chronic fatigue, ME. Think about it. You can't fight it, you can't flight it, so the body freezes. One way is to freeze. The body goes, where have I been safe before? Oh, I'm safe in my bed. So it takes you to, it reduces your energy, so you have to go and lie down and be in your safe place. Just for example, hypothetically. Okay, and again, fawning is a combination, and therefore, again, there can be a combination of health conditions that can happen. Is that helpful? Kimberly said this is a very informative slide. Thank you. You're very welcome. You're very welcome. So you can check that out later. And I love this quote by Lucius Seneca. The wish for healing has always been half of health. And I think that's so optimistic, and it's hopefully really reassuring to you, having heard all that if you have a wish for healing right now, it's half the battle. You're halfway there. It's such an important part, and don't take it for granted. Don't take it for granted. It's half of health. Another little motivation to get this, to keep learning this today and maybe repair it later is I couldn't find the name who came up with this quote, so I called it Anon. But we repeat what we don't repair. Oh, isn't that so true? It's like we're almost here to have certain lessons, gain certain virtues or whatever. And until we do that, we just keep getting the same patterns, the same problems, sometimes different faces, sometimes different job roles, sometimes different places, but the same issues keep cropping up time and time again. We reap what we don't repair. We create what we don't clear. Okay, so there's a good one to motivate you. We don't heal in isolation, we heal in community. I think this is a really important quote for trauma awareness, because whatever you do next after this masterclass, whether you work with me or someone else, please work with somebody. We do not heal in isolation, especially trauma. We need that interaction in community or one-on-one, ideally with someone else who's gone through the process and has a regulated autonomic nervous system who you can entrain to and benefit from. Okay? So I would urge you, however you do it, however you manage to do it, look to find someone who knows this stuff that can help you with it. Don't try and go off and figure out on your own when it comes to trauma. There's many other things you can do in a self-help way, but honestly, this needs that. You need a safe relationship that you can trust. You need a safe person that you can trust. And the first while we're working with someone, really the focus is on developing that safety, developing that trust in the therapeutic relationship. Because until that is in place, the nervous system stays in fight, flight, freeze, It's not quite safe. But when that dynamic happens, it's like exponential when how the healing can occur. So sometimes a bit of a slow start, but it's exponential once the trust and the safety are there. Heal the root so the tree is stable. R.H. Sin. Heal the root so the tree is stable. That's getting back to the resilience. That's getting back to the ANS again. And I just love the quote. Akshay Dubey said, healing doesn't mean the damage never existed. It means the damage no longer controls your life. So I was bullied, and I did have traumatic things happen in my life, traumas that happened and had left an injury behind. But when you are aware of what's happened and when you release it, it no longer controls you, no longer limits you. Awesome. And then let's end before the break with a little bit Rumi, shall we? You can never go wrong with Rumi. The wound is the place where the light enters you. The wound is a place where the light enters you. And that's really what I was trying to say earlier with there's many upsides of trauma awareness and healing because we can end up better. We can end up more conscious, more aware. We can end up with better beliefs that we've never had before. We can end up with more light within us and our lives. Thanks for joining me for today's episode. Please like, subscribe, and write a review wherever you happen to be listening. It really does help to support me and this podcast. For more information about my one-to-one sessions, Calm Clan community, books, and academy courses, head over now to minddetox.com.